My name is Sarah Call, Administrative Assistant for the Travel and Tourism Research Association. Welcome to today's webinar, The Data Dilemma, Using the Right Consumer Behavior Data for Tourism, presented by our TTRA partner, NEAR. Throughout this webinar, speakers Kate Zavad and Chihiro Fukami will help us discover how to turn raw data into actionable insights. This is a friendly reminder that we are using the Zoom webinar platform, so please drop any and all questions into the Q&A, and we will get to as many as we can throughout the session. Now, I'd like to hand this over to Kate and Chihiro.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you to TTRA for hosting us today. Good morning, good afternoon, perhaps good evening, depending on where you are. We're drowning in data, and most of it, frankly, is noise. And companies spend a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of money implementing data strategies for decision support, or even to initiate direct action in the case of a data-driven application. But if the underlying data quality that's feeding the machine of your business is poor, every downstream user, every usage is negatively impacted. So at best, you've wasted time and resources. At worst, you're basing a critical business decision on a false set of assumptions. And that's what we want to get into today. As Sarah mentioned, I am Kate Zobad, Vice President of Product and Industry Marketing at NEAR, and I am thrilled to be joined by my colleague, Chihiro Fukami, who is the Senior Director of Product Management and leads all of NEAR's operational intelligence product strategies. Hi, Chihiro. So today we'll talk in some detail about what mobile location data is, how companies use it, and most germane to this call, how it is sourced and prepared. We will set up the principles that Chihiro and her team have adhered to in building out our data products, and talk about why those principles are critical to your success. Finally, we'll get into some brass tacks about how to evaluate mobile location data providers, what criteria to use, and a little bit about what we think might be on the horizon as far as the location data market is evolving, especially in light of certain advancements in AI and the industry in general. So at the risk of talking to some of you who may be already fairly fluent in this kind of data or even using it yourself, we're going to spend a minute talking about what mobile location data is, and then share some use cases that we see in the travel and tourism industry that, even if you're using it today, may spark some new creative ideas for how to put it to work. So you got to kick off a presentation like this with some statistics, right? And we wanted to share some that just kind of underscore exactly how pervasive these new and advanced data types have become in business operations. Quite simply, I think it's not too bold to say that there is not a way forward for organizations who are not building their business on this kind of data. And the data that we've kind of all become comfortable with, the first-party data that we own, our CRM data, our point of sale data, they've really just become table stakes. They're necessary, but they don't tell you enough about what your potential market is. And what people are doing and how they spend their time and their money, the 99% of their time that they're not directly engaging with your brand or your destination or your location. And another thing that's at this point become a little bit of a cliche, but it remains true, is that the pandemic routed all previous understanding that companies had about their consumers. It changed the way people are working, shopping, eating, traveling. Some of those changes, such as return to work, may have been permanent, but sometimes they're not. The one thing that we can take away from all of that mishigas is that making assumptions about how consumers behave is no longer an option, nor is providing them with a brand experience that isn't created to their profile, their interests, and their needs. That is the bottom line expectation. So in order to do this and to compete effectively, companies have to invest in new kinds of data sources that help them understand the physical and the digital worlds in which those customers exist, and ideally bring those two things together. So if, as many of you are, you're already working with location data, congratulations, you're ahead of the curve. But even as you may have already experienced, the data that we're talking about is so vast and so complex. It's about time and it's about space that it's challenging to put to work in a scalable and a performant way that protects consumer privacy. And Shahira will talk about some of those challenges today. So this is the part you may already know, but that's okay. We're going to underscore some fundamentals. Mobile location data provides powerful insights into people and places. It allows us to understand consumer patterns, visitor origins, customer profiles, and behaviors, where people go when they visit a destination, how long they stay at those places. Where does it come from? Well, I imagine you all own smartphones. We all do. You've all probably downloaded applications and used browsers like Chrome or Safari that are connected to various networks and Wi-Fi. So in this connected world, we're all sharing a lot of information all of the time. And that information about where you or people are physically at a point in time, where they were or where they are going, can answer a lot of questions about your strategies. So in a minute, Shahira will dive into more detail about exactly where the data comes from. And more importantly, maybe as importantly, how we ensure it's accurate enough to fuel your business decisions. And I think because most of you are working with some of our awesome partners, a few of whom I think have joined the call today, we wanted to just kind of set up the ecosystem for you that NEAR plays in, so you sort of understand the journey that this data takes. So in tourism, we are working with some of the world's leading analytics, destination management consultants, and tourism solution providers and marketing partners who all use our data, often combining it with other data types and sources, but they apply their own industry knowledge and expertise to deliver really contextual insights to you, their end customers. And that can be in the form of dashboards and reports, in the form of entire marketing campaigns, even closed loop applications like dynamic pricing configurators. So we are collecting trillions of data points. This slide should probably extend even further to the left, and we should have like indigo plants or red clay or something, but we're collecting trillions of data points that at the end of the day represent an observed device at a point in time in a specific location. So those are your primary colors, your red, yellow, and blue. Then we supply very sophisticated calculations and workflows to that data and combine it in all kinds of myriad ways to generate insights about people, such as common evening location, which could be a proxy for home, or their dwell time, how long they spend in a location, or pathing, what routes do people tend to take between points. Cross-visitation, if someone visits one location, where else are they likely to go? That's really helpful to start to understand brand affinities. We then share this whole paint store, these mixed colors, with our partners who put it together with their end tools, with their expertise, and give you the Mona Lisa. And I'm a marketing person, so I can be kind of hyperbolic like that. Most common use cases in tourism, there we go. For tourism, travel, and hospitality, these are kind of the primary things that these are the questions that our customers answer with this data. But one area that I really wanted to underscore, because NEAR is really unique here, is that we also actually have our own native demand side platform for ad buying. So we're able to curate highly bespoke location-based, or what we sometimes refer to as act-alike audiences, based on where people's devices have been observed. So for instance, you might be building an audience of potential car buyers so that you can serve ads to people who have been seen at or around dealerships within a certain period of time. We can then deploy those campaigns directly from our platform, and they can be viewed on the end user's mobile device, web browser, via CTV, or really however they consume media. So, for instance, you might send an interactive digital brochure about a destination to your curated audience. Then not only can you determine, of course, who interacted with the asset, but also you can set a time frame to see who visited the destination within the location that you've pre-described, who also saw and engaged with the asset. So this kind of tracking of physical footfall or visitation tied to advertising truly delivers on a vision of closed loop marketing that's really, really hard to do. We recently did a full webinar on this topic, also with TTRA. So if that use case is of interest to you, please check it out, or I can send you the link. And then we also deliver the same kinds of insights for retailers, restaurants, hotels, airlines, all of whom want to deeply understand where their customers are coming from, what their attributes are, and what other brands are competing with them for time and money. And I bring that up because we are seeing a lot of really interesting and healthy cross-pollination happening across these adjacent and very high affinity industries in the form of multi-brand loyalty programs or co-marketing campaigns, et cetera. So that's kind of the business context. I think I'll pause here to see, Sarah, if any questions have come up. And if not, I am going to pass the baton to my esteemed colleague, Chihiro, who will get into a deeper dive about how this kind of data is sourced, prepared, as well as what you should be on the lookout for. So Chihiro, I will take it away.
Great, thank you, Kate. So as Kate mentioned in the beginning, my name is Chihiro and I lead product strategy and development of essentially the mobile location platform side of our business here at Near. So, definitely want to spend a little bit of time talking about where this data comes from, and it'll be a little bit technical, but not so technical that you wouldn't understand what we're trying to say. So companies like Near, we partner with a variety of data aggregators who collect data through mobile device apps, kind of like the screen that you're looking at here, where the owner of the device has obviously opted into the collection of the data. So at the most granular level, each data point includes the identifier, so like what mobile device the data is coming from, the precise latitude and longitude coordinates, so that's the where, and the exact time that that particular data point was collected. So you can kind of think of it as a bunch of pings coming from a single mobile device, but then we are getting that over, millions, billions of devices across the globe. So, if you have a single device that is sending out these pings to us, we can kind of like track that movement across, countries or even just, a smaller geographical location. But you can also visualize that data to see what that path looks like, what path people are taking to get from one location to the next. And we'll talk a little bit more about specific use cases in a little bit, but truly the possibilities with this data is pretty endless, right? You can do a lot of different things. The industry refers to this data as mobile location data, but we also like to call it consumer behavior data, just because it really does help infer who the customer or the consumer is, what they're doing at what point in time, and where they're located. And depending on the data, you can even model the intent, like why are they buying a certain thing or going to a certain place. So again, the data is very, very powerful. Kate, if you want to go to the next slide. So before we get into these metrics, I'll also note that most data these days are collected through digital means, by browsers, by phones. The data that we work with is a little bit unique in the sense that it actually describes patterns in the physical world, whereas if you're just looking at something like browser data, it's really just things that are happening on someone's computer or someone's phone, and it doesn't really tell you what they're actually doing out in the real world, right? So you can analyze a lot of things like what path people take to work. If someone was, let's say, visiting a car dealership last week, you could infer that they're looking for a car, right? These are things that maybe you can glean some stuff from just the online behavior, but I think this sort of real world behavior data definitely paints a more complete picture of what an individual is trying to do.
My college-age son spends a lot of time looking at cars online, and I'm here to tell you, he's not buying one.
Yes, the analysis of the data can be very, very complex, right? For this audience, obviously this includes things like where travelers are coming from, so like visitor origin, what sorts of attractions they're going to, where they're eating, where they're staying. So this is kind of a list of some of the more common metrics that, with data that we have, like you can compute and visualize. So yeah, so it's definitely, like I said, the possibilities are pretty endless. This is really just a basic list. You can take this and do more with it, or you can even get into a lot more complex type of analyses using things like AI and ML. Okay, so considerations when sourcing mobile location data. If you want to go to the next slide. So this is, you know, at NEAR, we believe that these are really the three key pillars around the data that really help maximize the value of this mobile location data for our customers. The first one, data quality, right? If it's not good quality, whatever comes out of the thing you're doing isn't going to be good either. So at NEAR, we discard as much as 75% of the data that we acquire. And we'll talk a little bit about like anomalies and why this is the case in a second, but it really does speak to our uncompromising commitment to quality, really. So we want to be the most comprehensive database of consumer behavior, but you know, we also want to ensure that the quality is there. So, you know, we are okay with, you know, taking away a chunk of data that doesn't really provide a lot of value to our end customers. So global data reach, breadth, this is also very important. Even if you have a ton of data, if it's really just restricted to a certain group of people, it's not going to be very helpful for an entire industry such as tourism. So we officially capture data for 44 plus countries, but in reality, I think we are actually collecting data for probably almost or up over 200 countries, right? Obviously, in some countries, we collect less data than others. But it just kind of speaks to just the reach that we have across the globe. This includes 70 million points of interest. So all kinds of, not just like tourism related POIs, but retail locations, you know, real estate buildings, roads, you know, you name it, we probably have it. And then finally, 1.6 billion devices, right? So that's, you know, that's most mobile devices on this planet. And then finally, the tools to provide configurable and actionable insights. So this part isn't specifically about the data, but obviously if you don't have a way to take this huge amount of data and turn it into something that actually helps you make decisions, then it's not very useful to have the data, right? And so as a platform, you know, I think a good provider like NEAR, like we provide a lot of these tools, visualizations, so that you can kind of easily glean these insights and you don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about like, you know, what's in the data, is it good? Like, how can I like aggregate some of these fields so that I can kind of get a quick sort of look at what is going on in a point of interest that I'm interested in. So we provide a lot of those tools. And obviously all this is delivered in a privacy first and consent-led approach. Right, so we can talk a little bit about sort of the process that the data goes through. So like I mentioned in the beginning, we get our data from a variety of you know, data sources, data partners, and you know, a lot of our competitors in the space do as well. And usually once you have the data, the first thing that you do have to do is put it through several kind of phases of cleansing, right? There's a lot of sort of obviously wrong data points where maybe if you look at, for example, the latitude and longitude coordinates, you know, you only have a couple of decimal points or something, right? And it's like, okay, well, that covers a larger area. It's not very useful. So there's very obvious things like that, but there's also, you know, a fair bit of what we would consider anomalous or fraudulent data in, you know, the billions, trillions of rows of data that we collect, right? And to kind of manually go through and comb through the data and pull that out would, you know, like that wouldn't be very practical. So we do have fairly automated ways of doing this. That's sort of part of this second step of processing and contextualization. So once we kind of take out the stuff that isn't useful, that's wrong, that is fraudulent, we also do something called contextualization where, you know, like I mentioned, each data point, we have the latitude and longitude coordinates, but for most people, that doesn't really mean anything, right? Like if I'm here in Pasadena, California, and Kate knows my exact coordinates, like she couldn't tell you that I was in a Starbucks or, you know, in an office building or my home without having to do some, you know, a lot of either computation or looking up in a map or something, right? And we we provide a framework for sort of automating that so that when you say, hey, who are the visitors that were in Hawaii or this aquarium or, you know, any location, we can easily sort of do that computation on the fly. That makes for a very kind of powerful platform that gives you a lot of insights easily, without a lot of overhead for the end user. And so once we do this processing step, obviously the data is in a much more manageable form, and then our customers may access the data either in its slightly more raw form, where we kind of preserve the individual ping level data, or you know, we can serve it in a way where it's a little bit more aggregated and you can build dashboards and visualizations, or just do analyses off of those aggregations directly. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the fraudulent data. So I've been working with data my entire career, and I've worked in a lot of different industries, and I would transparently say that this type of mobile location data is probably some of the dirtiest data that I've seen, right? When it comes directly from our sources, and you know, we have that initial set of the data, there's a lot of stuff in there. I would even call it crap that we have to go through. I think in the previous slide, Kate mentioned that, you know, we remove 75% of that data, but you know, that's because there is a lot of stuff that we can't use. We don't want our customers to have to comb through, right? And most of that is either fraudulent or anomalous data. So fraud indicators, right? We have here, if there's a lot of requests coming in from a device, like you see a lot of individual pings coming from the same device, it's in the same location, you know, first of all, it's not really useful to have, you know, duplicate data. So, you know, we'll have to remove that. And also, you know, if there are weird behaviors like they're flying across the globe, I think we call it Superman internally, but, you know, if they're in California one moment and then maybe in the next moment they're in Dubai, there's probably something going on because you can't physically get to that location in that amount of time that lapses between those two pings. So there's a lot of behaviors like that where we have to go through and kind of say, okay, like, does this make sense? And if it does make sense, is it like good enough that we can pass it on to the end user of the data? So those are a couple of examples. There's also, like it says in the slide here, spoofed locations. That's probably closer to what I was describing. Inflated observations. So in addition to kind of just putting numerous pings from the same location, sometimes there can be noise added to that same data point. So it looks like there's kind of a cluster of data points around the actual original data point that we collected. And so, you know, we have at NEAR statistical methods of removing some of those data points, just because, you know, it's not very likely for that sort of movement to be happening around a single point. IP derived versus true GPS lat long. Again, like there's sort of unrealistic behaviors that are happening with the data. You know, if someone were to manually go through and say, okay, like, does this make sense as a sequence of observations for a given device? The answer would probably be no, right? But again, like we can't, there's trillions of data points. We can't be doing that, you know, every day. So we do have fairly automated methods of going through. But at the same time, we have found that the types of anomalies, the types of sort of fraudulent things happening in the data, that does tend to actually evolve over time. So we'll see like different types of anomalies. And so, you know, once we do have these automated methods of removing fraudulent data, we can't just be like, okay, the work is done. We have to kind of be on the lookout for additional things that might come up. And, you know, there's always new apps, you know, new sources of data. And so depending on like how the data is collected, or maybe something that the app itself is doing, like it could sort of contribute new sources of fraudulent or anomalous data. Oh, Kate, did you want to describe the null island thing here?
Yeah, just because I think it's a fun bit of trivia. If you look across the world's digital stores of all of the data indicating where people visit. And you guys might already know this because you're in that industry. Null Island is the most visited place in the world. Null Island is a spot that's absolutely nowhere, right smack dab in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, because its coordinates are 0 degrees longitude and latitude. And so when you get a lot of fraudulent data, you'll see these coordinates just 0, 0, because for whatever reason, the lat long wasn't filled out. And as a result, Null Island is the most visited place in the world. So I thought that was kind of fun. And I don't know who, but some sort of international Coast Guard type body did actually put a beacon right on Null Island to indicate that it's 0, 0.
There's actually a quick question that I wanted to address. Is it possible to identify when VPNs are being used to spoof locations? Yes, to an extent. So one of the bigger causes of that Superman effect that I was describing earlier is VPNs, because it does look like the IP address, the location might be like somewhere other than the one that, the person is actually at. So I think, we can sort of categorize things like that under the larger umbrella of like weird things that shouldn't happen with the data. And in that sense, we are able to kind of identify it and remove the data. But if it's something that is a little bit less obvious, sometimes we're not always able to capture 100% of them. So it is a little bit kind of case by case, but largely yes. All right, so going back to data anomalies. So a lot of these like anomalies that we've been talking about, they do sort of show up in different forms, but one of the bigger reasons why we are able to kind of spot them pretty easily is because this type of location data, it gets visualized like all the time, right? This is like the easiest way to see where people are if you're doing like a heat map or any sort of like mapping exercise. And so two of the probably more common examples of anomalies that we have seen is number one, the hot circle, which is the one on the left. So you can see there's like fairly normal looking data points on this kind of greenish map background. And then there's like this huge, very obvious circle of densely scattered points. And, unless there's actually something geographically or I don't know, like significant about that location, that it seems unlikely that people would be congregating in that space. And it's pretty large too. If you look at it, it covers a fair bit of square footage. So that's definitely one type, very easy to spot, as you can see. The other one, we have something called the grid anomaly, and that's the one on the right, where if you sort of zoom in a little bit, you can kind of see that there's sort of vertical and horizontal line patterns happening kind of in this general area where there's a lot of the bluer like data points. And there's a couple of theories around how that is happening. One of them is like maybe it's not such a, maybe it's not so intentional in the sense that when someone is collecting data, they're not actually collecting all of the digits of the coordinates. So then everything kind of gets snapped to a grid. Other theories are that there is a little bit more kind of intent to obscure and or like add like fake data into the pool of data. And so if there is an actual data point, maybe someone will like add some noise, but that noise kind of happens to make the data fall on a grid because it's not developed in a very sophisticated way. Regardless, like this type of thing, like it isn't natural for people to sort of line up across these like grid lines, right? So in both of these examples, we have slightly more sophisticated ways of identifying the anomaly and then kind of removing points in a way where we're not just kind of like deleting everything, because there's some of the points along those grids probably are actual data points. So we want to preserve those. So it does take a little bit of like data science and machine learning to make sure that we are extracting the right points, the right locations, and making sure that like the true data points are still get to remain in the data set. But it is pretty visually striking to kind of see this stuff. And a lot of our customers, come back to us with feedback from time to time saying, hey, here's like a thing that we saw. And it's like, ooh, that's another anomaly. And then we'll look into it. And, you know, in the past at NEAR, we've actually probably identified maybe 7 or 8 types of anomalies. These aren't the only ones that we've seen. And we've devised ways to remove this data. But we have found that with every other fraudulent and anomalous data type, like this kind of thing, the new ones keep coming. And I don't know if it's just like a certain app developer or who it is, but they keep coming up with new ways to kind of add weird noise and potentially like spoof data, right? So again, it's not something that we can just kind of implement once and then walk away. We do kind of have to be on the lookout for new types of anomalies. And I think in recent years, I would say the last 12 to 18 months, we've actually seen an increase in new types of anomalies. So, you know, like we're actively investing in AI type of technologies to sort of automatically detect these new anomalies so that we don't have to go in and manually say, oh, there's something weird going on.
And Chihiro's probably too modest to point out that she published a blog, I think it was either yesterday or today, about what some of these more common anomalies that we've identified are, what they look like, and sort of how we're filtering for them. So we'll include that link in our follow-up materials.
There's another question. I know we said we'd answer all the questions at the end, but some of these questions are actually really interesting.
Yeah,
so
they're pertinent to the
love
topic.
to answer them live. Do you make allowances for the same person carrying more than one mobile phone, as we may have duplicated information? I think what you're asking is like, you know, what happens when you see data like that? So because they're 2 different devices, we do get a different identifier for both of the devices. But if the person is truly carrying them at the same time, then, you know, it's likely that we'll just see the same path for both of those devices. I think in some cases, we might consider that like anomalous data, because there are sometimes cases of fraudulent data where someone is actually duplicating something that's already happening. So it is a little bit harder to tell if it's like someone with more than one phone, or is it, you know, like weird data that's been spoofed. Yeah, I mean, to answer the question, I think most of the time we might sort of err on the side of thinking that is anomalous. Hope that answers your question. All right, so now that we've spent a little bit of time talking about data quality, this is actually a quick section, data reach and breadth, just because there's not a ton to say about it other than the fact that we do have, you know, pretty wide coverage. Like I said, 44 countries officially, but, you know, the count is probably in the hundreds. And for tourism, this is actually pretty relevant because, you know, we want to be able to capture people's behaviors across countries, right? There's a lot of people who are traveling across the globe and visiting multiple countries. And if you could only capture like a subset of those visits, that wouldn't paint a complete picture of where that person is coming from and all the places that they're going to. So that's pretty significant for us. POIs, we want to make sure that we know, like, okay, so if they did visit the US or France or some other country, like where specifically are they going to? And so, you know, we definitely allow for kind of the capturing and analysis of data around like what people are doing within specific like POIs, but also like at a more geographic level, like which states are people going to in the US? And then, you know, we also, this is, you know, I think very useful in some use cases, like we also allow people to draw custom polygons so that, you know, maybe someone is very interested in how someone gets from like a certain hotel to another attraction in the area, right? Like maybe there's a aquarium or something exciting to do that's like 20 miles away. And so, you know, are they Ubering there? Are they taking their own car? Are they taking a bus? Are they walking? You know, I think that sort of helps people understand how tourists are behaving in a certain area. So there's a lot of applications of this. But it, you know, I think platforms like ours actually allow for a lot of really flexible sort of analyses around this data. And then the devices, right? I mean, I think there isn't much to say beyond the fact that we capture close to 2 billion devices. So, you know, we're able to provide a pretty broad representation across tourist profiles, right? This is like, you know, demographics, age ranges, obviously like where people are coming from. And so this is important if, you know, you do want a more comprehensive picture of like who it is that is visiting the thing that you're interested in. Okay, data enrichment and modeling. So in addition to the data that we are directly collecting and storing, we actually do a fair bit of data enrichment. And I think a lot of companies like ours do that as well. In addition to demographics, which is kind of the obvious thing, like, you know, who is the person? How old are they? Where are they coming from? What's their education level, income, things like that. We also can do a fair bit of modeling with the data as well to determine like, okay, what is the likely home location, right? Like if you're someone in Hawaii, there's a good chance that you didn't come from Hawaii, but you wouldn't know that unless you maybe look back 7 days, 2 weeks, and saw where else they were and like what times they visited those locations. So we can provide a fairly accurate view of like, you know, origin for, you know, a set of devices, even individual devices. The other thing that you can model with this type of data is certain affinities, right? Like where are people likely to go to next? What are other types of locations that people visit, types of POIs, you know, do they eat at restaurants more? Do they go to the grocery store? That's a little bit more on the audience affinities part. But, you know, like who are they as an individual? What are the things they like? Because those things definitely influence where people go. What do they do? Right. And so I think the key point here is when you have all these different pieces of information, you can kind of start to establish kind of an identity of the visitors that are coming to the location that you're interested in. Right. And once you sort of understand your audience more, then, you know, there's advertising that you can do, or you can like offer up specific deals or, you know, suggest, you know, certain types of hotels to go to, certain types of attractions to go to. So, you know, this is really just a starting point to help you understand like what more can you do as a business to, you know, to support the customers that are visiting. Right, so this is just a little bit more on the segmentation piece. I'm not going to spend too much time. But, you know, when you're in any sort of tourism, travel related, hospitality related business, you want to know where your customers are coming from, right? Are they coming from within the country, out of state? How far are they traveling, basically? And then, you know, how long are they staying in your place? And then you can also see how long they're staying in other places that maybe isn't your hotel specifically, or another destination that isn't your destination, right? And you can start to kind of create not just a picture of like that person's identity, like with the slide before, but also like, how does that affect their movements across the globe?
I think a lot of this can help determine whether they're traveling for business or for vacation, and sort of the whys too.
Absolutely. So flexible, precise data for common use cases. So this is taking a little bit of a step back. The data that, you know, companies like Near collects, you know, we talked about this a little bit in the beginning. At the very granular level, it's basically a point in time with coordinates, and we also know like who you are, right? Assuming you've opted into this. So the precision of this type of data, even if ultimately you're just looking at aggregated data sets and creating a chart, it's really important to have that level of granularity, because unless you have that, you don't really have a great starting point for creating that more kind of complex analysis around your audience, around your visitors. So, you know, location, what do we have here? Like, you know, these are some of the use cases, but, you know, like, I know like some of these things probably aren't relevant to this audience, but, you know, if you're like a store and you want to know like how people are getting to your store, what are they buying, you know, that could influence how you lay out your store, for example. Also, another common use case for this data, again, not super relevant to this group, is, you know, if you're a big brand and you're looking to build another store franchise location in a new location, where is the right place to build that new store, right? Like you're a Starbucks, like where are people going to come and want to drink coffee if you're trying to build out to in a new market? So yeah, so again, like lots of different use cases, and, you know, having the raw data gives you just a tremendous amount of flexibility. You can do anything from defining the visit. So, you know, sometimes like in tourism, there are standard definitions around visits. What does it mean to be like an overnighter, things like that. But you can actually modify those definitions depending on how you want to analyze a set of users. You can also define specific workflows to do different types of computations or modeling with the data. And so, yeah, and then the last one here, pathing, right? That's one that's very interesting. You can see there's a picture at the bottom where you can basically kind of see how people are getting to certain locations, because you can see like the pings are along certain streets. And you can narrow that down to people who have visited a specific location, so you can see exactly how people are getting from home or your hotel to, you know, that aquarium or casino or whatever. So, you know, I think this also speaks to like the different ways and you can visualize the data if you have that level of granularity. And you can see that in like the 3 different visualizations at the bottom of the page.
That's right. We did have a client who was evaluating the frequency of the time between when a device was seen in order to determine whether people were walking to a location or driving to a location. So you can really set your dials very specifically based on what you want to know.
All right, so I think we talked a little bit about this, but yeah, even in tourism, travel, hospitality, there's a lot of configurability with the data that gets you specific insights that, you know, aren't as interesting to other industries, right? So, you know, I think this is just to say that this type of mobile location data, it's very agnostic around like the industries, the verticals. We can do anything if you're interested in how people are getting to places, what sort of behaviors they're taking, you know, destination geography, minimum stay, distance. And then the last one here, hand-drawn polygons. Like I said, you can customize like the locations that you want to analyze. It doesn't have to be like a specific hotel or, you know, something that is like an established business. You can, you know, create like a larger square or circle around an area that you're interested, or you can even take larger geographic areas, like maybe you want to look into a specific town or a series of locations, even national parks, which cover, you know, a lot of area. You can take that and then maybe see like, you know, what is the overlap between that population and you know, the people in another area, to see like, you know, how people are like their visitation profiles.
So I think at this point, we kind of want to jump into tactically what sorts of questions you should be asking about the data that you're getting. So I think Chihiro really did a great job of covering the sort of background of most of these and why you would ask them. But these are pretty obvious, right? Like the region, or all of the regions that you care about and want to understand where your visitors are potentially coming from, are they covered? How are the vendors that you're working with ensuring a really high level of quality? Maybe ask them what % of the data that they acquire do they keep? What are some of their filtering processes? How do they evaluate that data is good enough to sell to you? Where are they on compliance? I mean, each region is different, but I think we've actually written a short white paper that I can't remember exactly how many, 33 states are within a year of adopting very GDPR-like privacy regulations. So that has to be at the top of anybody's list who is selling any kind of mobility data. Related but not the same are what internal data handling and security processes does the company have in place to ensure that the chain of custody of the data is well protected? And Chihiro, maybe you want to comment on that in a second. How flexible a lot of vendors will sell maybe a dashboard or a way to access the data that is not terribly configurable. So if you have a really specific requirement around how you want to evaluate the difference between a business traveler and a vacationer, you need to be able to have control over what those parameters look like, and also the definitions that you're using as you sort of develop your metadata framework, and how you want to tag all of the kinds of attributes of the data that you're getting. So the data needs to be kind of available to you at a pretty granular level in order to do that. And the provider needs to have a lot of computing horsepower behind it to be able to fulfill on your very specific request on demand as you pull the data. And finally, and this is where, you know, we lean in hard with our partners, but we also have, I think, about 12 years of experience in selling into travel and tourism. It's one of our primary verticals, but anyone that you work with should understand your market and your space and your challenges, and what kinds of data and what use cases with the data can help you the most, and have a track record of having done those before. So this is our checklist. Did you want to comment, Chihiro, on any of these particular?
Yeah. So, you know, we talked about the first two bullets. So the third and fourth one, compliance and security. I mean, I can tell you that we've actually invested probably the last 12 months specifically on making sure that we are, you know, GDPR compliant and our data handling practices are sort of aligned with kind of like the most, you know, up-to-date sort of practices in the industry. You know, a lot of our customers have a lot of concerns about that, especially in areas like the EU where there are a lot more regulations, but even in the US where there's kind of a growing number of these things happening. So, and that's something that we are very much on top of, even as we think about like the next, you know, several quarters of our roadmap.
And we have written a more detailed ebook on all of the topics that Chihiro talked about today. So we'll be sharing that at the end as well, if you'd like to get more detail. Actually, Chihiro, before we move on to just the resources, I wanted to ask you if you had any thoughts just at a high level of sort of where mobile location data is going in terms of the industry itself, customer use cases, what providers are doing, like what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, we and I think many of our competitors have started to recognize that, you know, the mobile location data that, you know, we collect through these data aggregators, right? They're a great representation of what's happening in the real world, but ultimately they're a pretty small sample of like actual human beings in locations, right? And so one of the things that we have been working on, and I think some of our competitors as well, is an effective foot traffic estimator. So this basically allows for you to say, okay, we've gotten pings from, you know, 20 people in this specific Starbucks, let's say, right, in the past hour. But the true number is maybe closer to 200, right? And so we'd be able to tell you that based on some advanced modeling. So that's one kind of example of the more MI and ML type of stuff. But we are also, you know, given the amount of data that we have, it's like a great place to sort of test out some of the latest AI technologies that are out there. Not necessarily like the ChatGPT type of stuff, but there's actually a fair bit of other use cases for AI. And so, you know, we're hoping that we can maybe start launching some products based on that technology.
Yeah, and we're really interested in what our customers will be doing, because this is such a vast data store that it's a good substrate for predictive modeling and like all of the kind of new capabilities that AI is unlocking for companies. So we're thrilled to be playing a role in that. Finally, we have a lot of additional resources and testimonials and case studies and on and on and on. So all of this is available on our website. As I said, I think that Brianna will be following up with some additional materials, and Chihiro and I are always available to answer any questions or chat further about your needs. But at this point, Sarah, did we have any other questions that have come in?
I did see one other. Let me just try to pull it up real quick. Okay. Someone asked, what are some challenges around privacy that we should be aware of as we acquire this data? And how does NEAR think about changing privacy legislation?
Chihiro, do you want to?
I'll take the first one. Maybe you can take the legislation one. So as I mentioned, we strive to be compliant with the major regulations out there, including GDPR. And so, with our data, we basically do not allow our customers to access like the device level data or specific pathing types of analyses, because that could sort of point to a specific person or a group of people. And so that's, sort of to align with the spirit of GDPR, we don't want to expose people's private information, right? So there are steps that we are taking. We will aggregate certain data sets. Ultimately, we're not looking to sort of diminish the utility of the data just because we are compliant. And so that's some of the research that we're doing right now, is how can we make not just the data, but the analyses behind the data available to our customers without sort of, being non-compliant with these privacy regulations.
Yeah, I don't know that I'd add much to that. We do have a chief privacy officer and a team focused on privacy. As Chihiro said, the ongoing conversation at NEAR is what is the trade-off between privacy and utility. So we're trying to look at each of our most popular use cases, and also where the data is coming from, because if it's coming from Europe, we have to provide it at a higher level of aggregation. But what is the minimum aggregation that we can give you where the data is still useful for you and supports your use case, but is also compliant? And if we have to choose between the two, we're always going to err on the side of compliant. But that's another topic that we could have a webinar on.
Awesome. That was all the questions on top of the two that Chihiro already answered. If anyone else has any other questions, you're welcome to always reach out. You can reach out to me at admin@ttra.com, and I'll make sure it gets to either Kate or Chihiro or whoever the right person may be. Thank you so much to everyone who attended today. Your questions were very insightful. And I just want a friendly reminder that TTRA members will get a free recording of this webinar in the coming days, and non-members will receive the link to purchase if they would like. Thank you so much again. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, TTRA, and thanks everyone for joining.